Every time it rains, it rains. pennies from heaven. Don't you know each cloud contains pennies from heaven? You'll find your fortune falling all over town. Make sure that your umbrella is turned upside down. Save them for a package of sunshine and flowers. If you want the things you want, you've got to have showers. So when you hear it thunder, don't run under a tree. There'll be pennies from heaven for you and me. You'll find your fortune falling all over town. Make sure that your umbrella, make sure that umbrella is turned upside down. Save it for a package of sunlight and flowers. If you want the things you want, you're gonna have showers. So when you hear it thunder, don't you run under a tree. There'll be pennies from heaven for you and me, baby. Pennies from heaven for you and me. Oh yeah. Thank you. I saw you dancing, Dean.
You saw me dancing. You saw me full of joy inside because of your presence here, Fulani and Michael. I want to say hello to everybody. There's a bunch of you. Richard Crowley, Kevin Devine, Jill Charney, many more. I won't go through the whole list, but it's just great to have every one of you here. in the auditorium, and great to have a few folks physically present here. We are inviting and encouraging folks to come down to Copley Square at 11 a.m. on a Sunday if you want to or feel safe to. We are staying masked if we're not speaking or singing, and we are ventilating as fully as we can, windows open, doors open, and fans on. And so we want to be safe, especially for the sake of Fulani. I want to acknowledge that Fulani is a retired registered nurse, the heroic people of this planet right here, right now. And I say that for a very personal reason. I have, my name is Dean Stevens, by the way, and I call myself interim administrator and music director and bottle washer of Community Church. And it so happens that the last 9 days I've lived in mono, as if I was hearing the whole world through a little dinky speaker on a transistor radio. It was from a wax blockage that came to me, and it could not be expunged or extricated for 9 days. And it took 3 visits to a doctor, an ENT, to finally clear it out. And it happened Friday, and I'm back in Technicolor, full stereo, and I am just, I just want to express joy for that. And if that ever happened to any of you, you know how scary it is. And I was planning on being Beethoven, a deaf musician. Not that I would compare myself to Beethoven. Come on, that's a little bit, but you know what I mean. So I just want to share that joy that that there is a medical profession who can do some pretty cool plumbing to you and fix you sometimes. You know, and a wax blockage is not a big thing, but it can be pretty stuck in there. And you know, not to mention sewing up the hole between chambers of the heart, or reattaching appendages when they've been torn apart, or coming up with vaccinations. All that amazing stuff. It's a horrible, broken world, but human beings do some great stuff every once in a while. I want to just make a few announcements. I have a pile of reminders about announcements, and this is a t-shirt. It says "Justice Today." We got a whole mess of these from one of our members behind bars, whose name is Pat O'Shea, and he's trying to start an online sort of blog, and it's going to be called Justice Today. And I admire his effort, and we have a bunch of these t-shirts. We sold a bunch of them before COVID, and sent him some of the money for starting this effort, writings of prisoners. Which brings me to the next really important announcement, which is another one of our members behind bars is named Lee Underwood, and he has a parole hearing this Thursday at the parole board's office in Natick. And if we have 4 or 5 people going, if any of you are able to be in Natick, it's behind the Dick's Sporting Goods there on Route 9, and I can give you the directions, or I can give you a ride. We'd love to have a good showing for Lee's parole hearing. And he has some attorneys in training who were with us last Sunday. Be in touch. Dean@deanstevens.com, and we want to get a bunch of folks there because we know Lee. He was out for a while, and he was a member of our congregation for a short while. He had a house, he had a room, let's say, and he had a job, and then he was pulled back into prison for 3 or 4 more years. And then there was a parole hearing, and it took a year to make their decision, and he was held again, and now he has another hearing. And I will spare my anger at the parole board just to say that we're going to be there and we're going to be in support of Lee Underwood this Thursday, October 21st, 10 a.m. And we have to, you do have to be in touch with me. I have to give the names of everyone who's coming to the parole board in advance. Here's our new newsletter. It came out. And let me mention the first program we had last week with Louise, half sky dancer, the 2021 Poet Laureate of the country of Canada, a Native American poet. And it was just a wonderful thing to have her with us. And I'm sure we'll hopefully have her physically at some point in the future, because she's just a lovely person, just incredibly gracious. And it goes on to today's program, which is, of course, Khury. We're so looking forward to hearing from you, Khury, and a bunch more programs upcoming. And we're just very excited about Sundays. This is all Sundays. And we also are excited about a winter set of programs that'll be Friday nights. And they're going to be called Winter Fridays. And that's on the back here. And it's mostly music, but some just a program, a speaker with music on Friday nights. And they're free, but donations accepted. This is all a benefit for these performers. Some of them who have been with us here at Community Church, others who are just friends of mine who I'm just dying to hear from. So that's the next one. We also have a big weekend coming up. Saturday, 1 p.m. Bill Alberts, presente. Reverend William Alberts was our minister for 10 years in the 80s. Beautiful ministry and a very prolific writer of all kinds of articles, sermons, op-eds, and books. And here's a book called The Hospital Chaplain at the Crossroads of Humanity. He wrote about his years after Community Church, being the head chaplain at Boston Medical Center. Here's The Minister Who Could Not Be Prayed Away. And it's a testament to his very outspoken radical beliefs, especially his lawsuit with the Methodist Church, who fired him for marrying two people of the same gender in 1972, before that was even a thing. Well, so just a groundbreaking minister. This one is a compilation of his articles for Counterpunch. It's called The Counterpunch Minister Who Couldn't Be Prayed Away Again. His memorial service is this Saturday, 1 p.m. Arlington Street Church, just 3 blocks down that way on the Common. Be there to remember Bill Alberts. After that, at 4 p.m. here at the church, we're going to have an event that's about Afghanistan. And it's co-sponsored by Mass Peace Action and Veterans for Peace. And of course, Community Church is offering the space for this forum on Afghanistan. A bunch of speakers, I don't have them at the tip of my tongue, but they are, it should be a marvelous event. One of the very first kind of events that we're opening to the public, and there'll be a lot of people, and we'll try to ventilate as much as we can, all fans blasting, our brand new air conditioning fans blasting. We got air conditioning this summer. And so that's at 4 p.m. also on Saturday. Then Sunday, Winona LaDuke will be with us, talking about the Line 3 pipeline action in Minnesota. And several other activists who have traveled there will give their impressions. We'll have music by the marvelous duo Magpie, 50 years of playing the music of social responsibility and conscience and revolution and all that good stuff, Magpie. And then on Monday, we are going to be involved with Mass Peace Action and a bunch of speakers with an event on behalf of Julian Assange, Freedom for Julian Assange. And that one is at 1 p.m. on Monday at the First Church in Cambridge, on the Cambridge Common there, where Mass Peace Action has their headquarters. I will be there contributing some song, and so will several other speakers and a lot of people in solidarity with Julian Assange, who I will mention received our 2021 Sacco Vanzetti Award. Let me finish by saying that here's the auditorium, and there's several things you can see by coming yourself to the auditorium. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday is when Crystal and I have office hours here, and we'd be glad to receive you and give you a walk around, show you what it looks like. We have a lot of new artwork up, including some things Crystal has done and some banners. Also in the auditorium is our membership list. I'm directory. It's people's who've signed up to be members. We have 3 2021 new members, and we'd love to have you add your name if you would like to be a member. I'd love to talk to you about what's involved in that. You don't have to accept Jesus as your personal savior in order to be a member or pledge to anything. It's about understanding what community church is about, and being in solidarity with us, and being in communion with us in our efforts to maintain this ornery building, and our efforts to present amazing speakers, and to be of service to this community, and be of action for a future of peace and social justice. Oh, wow. So 2 little readings, and then we're going to hear back from Fulani and Michael. The first one, Eduardo Gagliano, my favorite Uruguayan author, in fact, of all Latin America author. And this is a book of days. It's kind of like what a lot of churches do. They have lectionaries or readings for the entire year. Anyway, this has one for each day, and I haven't even read it yet, and I just love every one of these. They're about 2 paragraphs long usually. It's the way Gagliano wrote a lot in small vignettes about everything. One of he's got a 3-volume book called Memory of Fire that's the entire history of the Americas from pre-Columbian all the way till now, told in 2 or 3 paragraph vignettes. And it's my favorite book on the planet, I think. Anyway, this is for October 17th, and it's called Silent Wars. Today is International Day for the Eradication of Poverty. Poverty does not explode like bombs or boom like gunfire. We know everything about poor people: what they don't work at, what they don't eat, how much they don't weigh, how much they don't grow, what they don't think, how often they don't vote, and what they don't believe in. The only thing left to learn is why poor people are poor. Could it be because we are clothed by their nakedness and nourished by their hunger? Eduardo Gagliano. And finally, one last poem inspired by my quadrasonic stereo ears, free of their wax. This is a song. Woody Guthrie wrote this, and the group Magpie, who will be with us next Sunday, set it to music. But I'm just going to read it as a poem. And this is in the category of songs I would never sing for my mother. And I'll explain that because it talks about being born again, and my mother, who I love dearly. That means a whole different thing than it does to me on this day, the beginning of the rest of my life, hopefully with unimpaired ears. This morning I am born again, light shines through the land. I do not seek a heaven in some deathly distant land, no longer desire a pearly gates, nor want a street of gold. I do not want a mansion, for my heart is never cold. My heart is never cold. This morning I am born again, I am whole, new, complete. I am o'ercome all my sins, I stand on my own 2 feet. I am life unlimited, my body as the sky. I am at home in the universe where yonder planets fly, where yonder planets fly. This morning I am born again. My past is dead and gone. This great eternal moment, my great eternal dawn. I'd give myself, my heart, my soul to give some friend a hand. This morning I am born again. I'm in the promised land. I am in the promised land, especially because I'm in the presence of Fulani Haynes and Michael Shea.
And then you went away, you went away. The day got longer. And soon I'll hear old winter song. But I'll miss you most of all. My darling, my darling, my darling. When those autumn leaves start to fall, the autumn leaves drift by my window, the autumn leaves of red and gold. I see your lips, oh, those summer kisses, those sunburned hands I used to hold. And then you went away, the day grew longer, and soon I'll hear old winter song, but I'll miss you most of all. My darling, my darling, my darling, when those autumn leaves start to Thank you.
Autumn Leaves. Fulani and Michael. Hey, folks, I got one more little piece from my show and tell. And that is some fabric that Crystal Rollins Jackson, our publications manager, brought me from Ghana. Woo, 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 woo. It's just lovely. I don't know if you all knew that Crystal and her husband, Reggie Jackson, lived in Ghana for 3 or 4 years in the early 2010s. Reggie retired from Simmons and taught in Ghana, and Crystal got a job as publications manager for this same university. And they were just able to go back after quite a few years and visit this summer. And I got a textile out of it, and it's beautiful, and it'll be on the wall of the auditorium sometime soon, as soon as I get around to it. Richard Crowley, so good to see you, Dick. And Kevin Devine, Dave Lewitt, Lynn, Dan, Cole Harrison, Mike Heichman, Ken, I bet it's Ken Casanova, Barry Warner, Sophia Woolman. Oh, Sophia, hi. All right. And Asha Talda, I don't know, Asha and Nisha, and Joan, hi, Joan, and Karen, and Mary Lynn, and Beatrice Green, hi, Beatrice. Also, her fingers grace the notes of this beautiful piano in our auditorium. She practices here quite a bit. And several other phone numbers from Maine, two numbers from Maine, and one who lives in Maine who still has a Boston phone number, and that would be Lenny. So anyway, greetings to everybody, and a bunch more who are on the YouTube. This is my chance to express an attitude of gratitude to Khury Petersen-Smith, who I'm going to put on the spotlight, for being with us once again here at the church. Khury has presented several times now. I'll tell you that my first introduction to Khury was when he was my son's 7th grade school teacher at the Mission Hill School some years ago. And since then, he has gone on to finish doc and postdoc studies. And I especially grateful to Khury for the deep connection that he has made with his work between Black Lives Matter and the Palestinian struggle. And I will mention that Khury works at the Institute for Policy Studies, which we know well. Chuck Collins, another fellow there, has presented to us before. So we're just so glad to have you with us, Khury, on a topic that is so much for this moment after the 20 years of war. Khury Petersen-Smith, folks, let's give it up for him. You don't need to even hear it.
Thank you so much, Dean. Thank you to the community church. What blessings from our musicians. Thank you so much. I didn't know how much I needed those performances, but I'm very grateful. And thank you all for joining me. I mean, I'm so grateful to see these folks who names who I and faces that I know very well, and folks who are new to me too. But there are people who I'll just say who I really look up to and learn with on this call, and so I feel very grateful and honored to be talking here and to be talking about some things that I've been trying to work through when I think about 20 years of war. Of course, the United States has been at war for many more years. I would argue that the United States as a project emerged through war. So this is a deep problem. But particularly when we talk about the war on terror, we are actually 10 days after the 20th anniversary of the US invasion of Afghanistan. That was 20 years ago. Days before that anniversary is the anniversary of knocks on the door across this country at Muslim households and the disappearing of many Muslim relatives, many stories of which are just coming out now, 2 decades later. So this is a particular kind of moment that we're at when it comes to war and militarization and racism and surveillance. And I've been thinking a lot about it and how to reflect and what are our responsibilities in this moment. And so I'm very grateful to be able to come to this space with those thoughts, with people who I've gotten to think with over many years, and again, people who I'm just meeting, as we collectively figure out what are we going to do? What are we doing right now? What are we going to do? So thank you. Joan, I miss you too. FYI, folks, I was in DC for a while, but I am back in Boston. I'm here in Dorchester. So grateful to be home, even if I only see folks online in many cases. So let me get into it and say that ultimately what I'm going to talk about today is a hopeful future of demilitarization and decolonization. That does require talking about the dark present. And there's so much that I could say, that we could say to open a conversation about what 20 years of the war on terror have been. I want to focus, I'll say a lot of what I say today will be focused on Afghanistan in particular. And I want to zero in on an incident that happened on August 29th of this year that folks probably will remember. This is when the US actually carried out a drone strike in Kabul and killed 10 people, 10 unarmed people, 7 of whom were children. The idea, or the sort of stated objective, and for a while, actually the Pentagon claim actually happened, was that they were killing ISIS operatives. And through the work of the family members of those killed and of journalists, we know the truth, which is that these were 10 civilians killed, one of whom, the man targeted actually is named Zamarai Ahmadi. He was an Afghan aid worker who was targeted by the Pentagon, accused of working with ISIS. When in fact, this family was, like so many Afghans, headed to the airport in Kabul to try to flee Afghanistan as the Taliban was coming to power. And so this murder of 10 people, again, 7 children, by the United States, not in a kind of accidental misfire, but in a very calculated operation. This, unfortunately, is not an aberration over these past 20 years, but actually it's emblematic of these past 20 years, which have been years of drone strikes and night raids and torture in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Yemen, in Syria, in Libya, in Somalia, and in many places that have been entangled in the war on terror. So this isn't, in a way, this act wasn't unique, but there are a couple of things that made it unique. One of which is the fact that we know about it, because one of the horrors of the past 20 years of war is that it has been conducted quite deliberately in the shadows, hidden from the public, and especially hidden from the US public. They've wanted to make sure, the people running this war wanted to make sure that we in this place don't know what the war constitutes. So the fact that we know about this attack, we know that these were civilians, we know the names of the people killed, we've seen the photos of the people killed, is quite unique. It is an unfortunately rare moment in which the reality of what the US has been doing and the humanity of the people who it has targeted actually breaks through. Another thing that makes this unique, the second thing, is that the Pentagon, again, after having denied that they killed civilians initially, have finally admitted it, which is again, unfortunately significant and rare, but also is talking about compensating the families of those killed in what they call ex gratia condolence payments. Now, the notion of committing an act like this and then compensating the families of those who survived, those killed, that is not without its problems. It is, in fact, something that, again, while rare, has been done throughout the war on terror. The US has killed people and then compensated some, a small fraction of the families of the survivors. And there's any number of problems. I mean, it doesn't bring people back, to say the least. And in fact, what we need is not, we need a conversation that says this is not an aberration, but rather we need an indictment of the whole war itself. That's not what the Pentagon is interested in. Okay. And yet there's something that is worth looking at, kind of digging into about this notion that the Pentagon has again, not on its own volition, but has said, all right, we owe these families something. The term ex gratia, which is a term that I'm just learning, it's Latin, and it roughly means, by a moral obligation, beyond a legal obligation, a moral obligation. And so if the Pentagon is saying we have a moral obligation to the survivors of this drone strike, then I think we need to ask some questions. Not only what is that obligation, but why just this family? And rather, why not the whole nation of Afghanistan? What does the US owe to the nations that it has impacted so violently over these past 20 years? So that's one thing that I've been thinking a lot about, and I invite us to think about, is what does the US owe to all the people and the groups of people that it has harmed over these 2 decades? So with that, I want to offer 3 kind of ideas today in this talk. And the first one is that there is a future in which the people of Afghanistan are free and thriving. And not only the people of Afghanistan, the people of Yemen, of Somalia, of Iraq, of Syria, of all these places that are struggling so deeply, and whose struggles the United States is deeply implicated in, places where life is so difficult, in Afghanistan. There is a future, a bright future of Afghanistan. I don't know when it is coming, but I know that it's coming. And I know that because if you just scratch the surface of Afghan history, of Afghan culture and art, literature and poetry, and you see the richness of this nation. If you spend just a minute following the rich conversations unfolding on social media right now among Afghans, both in Afghanistan and throughout the diaspora, even in their darkest hour, you see the capacity that exists among these people to imagine and create, to build a different future than the reality facing them now. If you listen to journalists like Ali Latifi and Emran Faraz, and if you listen to Pashtana Durrani, the person who is the CEO of the organization Learn, an organization whose mission is educating Afghan women and girls, Pashtana has decided to stay in Afghanistan. She is currently on the move, moving from safe house to safe house as she evades the Taliban and reckons with this situation that the United States has played such a role in creating. And yet she continues to do her work, and so many people whose names I don't know continue to do this work in Afghanistan. If you talk to people like Halima Wali and Arash Azizada and Lida Azim, the founders of the organization Afghans for a Better Tomorrow, these are Afghan Americans who are saying, what can we do in this place to advocate for the agency of Afghans to determine their own future? If you check out these conversations, and I'm just speaking to the ones that I can follow as somebody who does not know Pashto or Dari, right, who's only an English speaker, you can see the capacity of people of that nation and people of nations all over the world that have been so shaped or impacted by violence to actually self-determine a much more beautiful future. So those futures are coming. And again, we don't know the timeline, but we know that those futures are coming. The capacity exists. And with that said, you know, no group of people is an island. We all exist in this kind of global context and in relationship with each other. And this brings me to my second point, which is that we as people of this country called the United States are in relationship with the Afghan people. And I want to ask again, what do we as inhabitants of this place owe the people of Afghanistan? Now, on one hand, I want to make a distinction between the US government and the people of the United States. Thankfully, we are not identical with the government. And when I think about the government and the Pentagon and the various presidential administrations and the State Department and the Congress and all the decisions that these people who hold power have made to impact places like Afghanistan, there is so much that is owed. When I think about the tens of billions of dollars that the United States has invested into violence in Afghanistan, I think about, well, what is owed to be part of the repairing of the harm that the US bears so much responsibility for in Afghanistan. And that can't come through, in my opinion, USAID or the various aid regimes that the US administers, because this isn't about aid. This isn't about the US helping out, something that itself we should actually interrogate, the notion that the US is helping out other countries. But this is about reparations, in my opinion. So when I think about what we as inhabitants of this place owe to our relatives in Afghanistan and to Yemen and Iraq and places all over the world that have been impacted by the war on terror, I think that we need to make demands on our government, or this government, to do some of that repair and those reparations. But I also think it actually goes deeper than that, because it's more than just the US government that is implicated in the violence that has been unleashed on the world for these past 20 years. And I actually want to bring it, I want to bring it home to this place that we call Boston, because there are institutions here that are implicated in that violence. I think about Tufts University, my alma mater, which has a place called the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and which has, among other things, something called the International Security Studies Program. This is a program that is designed to train US military personnel, officers, and to help them in their work, which is the work of violence. It's the work of imperialism. It's the work of militarization. It's the work of imposing a will that is concocted in Washington on the world through violence. And Tufts plays a role in that. I think about Harvard and MIT, which among many other things, administer something called the Grand Strategy Security and Statecraft Fellows Program, which has a similar mission of military and civilian personnel that go on to work or currently work in places like the State Department to do precisely that, to take these schemes that are developed in Washington and impose them on the world through coercion. That's happening in Cambridge. And there's any number of other institutions, including the weapons industry, which I know that there are folks present here. Cole Harrison comes to mind, who could say much more about the weapons industry here in New England than I could. I think about Raytheon, based in Waltham. And I think about billions of dollars that has flowed through that corporation and has therefore flowed through our area. I think about the northern suburbs of Boston, Burlington, up on 128, this kind of cluster of different institutions, military, academic, and corporate, that are all about developing weapons. I think about General Electric, which is now based in Boston, which is, of course, a weapons manufacturer in addition to all the other things that it does. It's one of the main weapons manufacturers. And so wealth that has funded the research and development of weapons has flowed through not just this country, but our city, our area. And I think that it really implicates, it calls on all of us, actually, to reflect on what our relationship has been to people in places like Afghanistan. I would argue it's a pretty bad relationship. But what's hopeful is that the relationship isn't over. The story isn't over about the relationship between the people of Afghanistan and the people of this place called the United States. And actually, we have a role to play in helping to write the rest of the story. And so that's the third idea, and the one that I want to kind of end on, which is this question of what future are we building together? And again, when I think about what our relationship is with the people of Afghanistan, because whether we know it or not, the people who live in this country are bound with the people of Afghanistan. It's a question of us realizing those bonds and then being intentional and thinking about what is our role in these relationships. And again, to reiterate, this isn't about a future in which we are helping Afghans. And while I think that repairing the damage that the institutions of this country have made has got to be a key part of that future, I actually think that there's something deeper than that. And it isn't so one way as that, as Americans repairing damage. Actually, it's a relationship in which we need each other. Those of us living here, we actually need the people of Afghanistan as well in this relationship. And that's for any number of reasons. I'll name two. One is because there are problems that we, all of us on this planet, are facing that require cooperation across borders and actually require the dismantling of borders, I would argue. I'm talking about things like climate change, pandemics, displacement. There are tens of millions of people being displaced all across the world right now by climate change, by wars, by economic devastation, again, because of the actions of power brokers in Washington and other power centers. There are millions of people being displaced, many of whom arrive at the militarized border of this place called the United States. But this is actually not just an American problem. This is a global, a transnational problem. And we have to cooperate to find the solutions to these problems. I think about any number of questions that we are struggling with domestically in this society. that are not just questions that we're raising here, questions, for example, of ending oppression based on gender, of women's liberation, and ending patriarchy. This isn't just a question that is asked in the United States or just in Afghanistan. People all around the world are asking these questions, questions of how to live in pluralistic societies that have complicated histories, where groups of people have harmed other groups of people, are questions that we're not only asking in the United States, that Afghans are not only asking, we're asking these all around the world. And I think that we can only gain by asking these questions in conversation with each other. And I would argue, actually, that problems that we encounter in the United States will not be solved in the United States. We actually need to be in conversation with people around the world. So how do we get to relationships that healthy where we can have those kinds of conversations? And then the last thing is that we actually need to decolonize this place, to demilitarize this place called the United States. Yes, for the sake of people all around the world, but actually for our own sake. There is no liberated future for those of us who inhabit this place if it's not decolonized. That process is, of course, a long and winding road. It, of course, essentially requires the leadership and the honoring of Indigenous resistance. It requires Black liberation. But just as centrally, it actually requires relationships with people around the world who've been impacted by US empire. And I want to bring it back to Boston. When I think about how imperial violence and colonization have shaped this place, not just the colonization of this land, this Wampanoag and Massachusett land, that colonization is ongoing, right? And we have to stop that. But again, the money that has flowed through the city's institutions, the funding that has gone to universities and shaped what they have taught and who they have taught. If we think it doesn't matter that military officers have been coming to places like Harvard and MIT and Tufts to study violence and then live as neighbors in our communities, if we think that doesn't impact our communities, we should think again. When we think about the thousands of residents of these communities who have cycled through these countries as soldiers, people in combat, and who have come back here with what they have done and what they have experienced, we'd have a lot to reckon with here, and we actually have to do that in relationship with people around the world. So I want to end on this point about thinking about 20 years of demilitarization, because again, the war on terror has been 20 years of racism, surveillance, and militarization. And when I think about overcoming all of that, undoing it, now or a year from now or 5 years from now, it's pretty daunting. But when I think, what about 20 years from now? What could things look like in 20 years if we commit ourselves to demilitarization, to anti-racism, to dismantling the borders and the surveillance regimes that have been constructed? 20 years feels a lot more hopeful. So with that, I'll end, and I look forward to engaging today and afterward. Let's all be in touch, because we've all got to figure this out. Thank you.
Unmute. Am I unmuted? Thank you, Khury. Thank you so much. I hope I'm unmuted. I think I am. We will have a conversation with Khury, but first, two things. One is a little beautiful collection basket. It contains legal tender, and it also contains some paper. This can be done also through Bits and Bytes by way of our communitychurchofboston.org website, PayPal, credit card, or it can be done by check to our paper check to our address, which is 565 Boylston Street, Copley Square, Boston 02116, and we will put that address in the chat. We don't quite yet accept Bitcoin or Apple Pay or Poople Pay or Supple Do and Bubble Do, but we're getting there. Slowly, we're trying to improve our tech game, and that leads me to telling you that we wish we had a bunch of fancy cameras to just give you a better sense of what it's like being live with these two wonderful artists today. But this is what we've got, which is my laptop pointed at them. And it's pretty good for me live in stereo, but for you, maybe a little less, but I hope you some of the beauty, grace, style, elegance, and soul of Fulani and Michael comes through. We're going to hear once more from them, and then we'll have a Q&A. And I wish you were here, because after that, there will be pupusas. That's from El Salvador. It's a delicacy, and we have been enjoying them every Sunday as an enticement for you to come down sometime if you feel so safe and so led and so brave. You're welcome here. Fulani Haynes and Michael Shea.
I'd like to say before we begin, it's been a pleasure being here again with you, Dean, at the community church. We hope to see you many more times. It's always a pleasure. It's beautiful. The atmosphere is changing in here. The artwork and the bright ceiling, window, and the doors and the windows are open. The fans are blowing. It's very comfortable. Michael and I would like to do a tribute to families, individuals who have lost any of their dear ones, their dear friends, their children, to COVID. I lost a very dear friend. Her name is Cynthia Babor, and she was in a singing group with me in the 90s with Rochelle Randolph. But Cynthia has transitioned because of COVID. And I'd like to sing this song for her. I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places that this heart of mine embraces. The whole day through, in that small cafe, the park across the way, the children's carousel, the chestnut tree, the wishing well. I'll be seeing you in everything that's light and gay. I'll always think of you, my friend. I'll always think of you that way. I'll find you in the morning sun, and when the night is new, I'll be looking at the moon. But I'll be seeing you. I met Cynthia about 26, 27 years ago when she had triplets. Her triplets had cerebral palsy. She had 2 boys and a girl. And I was the nurse assigned, visiting nurse assigned to her home to help her to manage her triplets. She fought a great fight in the hospital, and her husband, Stephen Barbour, was right by her side. Her son, Stephen, her daughter, Ashley, and Justin were my patients. And she was the kind of mother that never, ever stopped taking care of her children. It was beautiful to watch her as they developed from infants on G-tubes, growing into young people on G-tubes, and then teenagers on G-tubes, and now they're free of most of that. They go to school, they graduated from school. They have their daddy to take care of them now. My dear friend Cynthia and Stephen's wife she has moved on. She was buried about 3 months ago. So I love you, my dear friend, as you make your path home to your resting place. We love you. My daughters, my sons, my family love you very much. Find you in the morning sun, and when the night is new, I'll be looking at the moon. I'll be looking at the moon. I'll be looking at the moon. And I'll be seeing you. Bye, my friend.
Fulani, this is for Cynthia. Cynthia Barbour, we say, presente, which means you're still with us. You're with us right here, along with those we have lost. Seeing as we are coming to Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, where we remember people we've lost long ago or just recently. Another one we're remembering a lot is named Robert Datilio, who we're coming up to a year of his passing, but we think of him now because finally, with the settlement of his estate, we are inheriting a lot of his books, and they're coming into the church instead of going into the dumpster, and it's a marvelous thing to see these books coming in. We proceed to a conversation with Khury, and we'd love to have you join us either with questions in the chat, or you can do your little hand raising, which is a function that Zoom has, or you can just lift your hand up, and I'll sort of go over the people who are on the video, and anyone who'd like to make an observation or have a question or a conversation with Khury. Here's your chance. Let's see. I haven't reviewed the chat, but Khury, Jill Charney says, thanks for all of this. So inspirational in many ways. Good Trouble is definitely on its way. Good Trouble.
Mike Heisman has his hand up.
John Lewis presente, I say. Mike Heisman, take it away.
Thank you, Khury. It's good to be with you, my brother. One of the things that I miss about Trump being president I really miss him in one way. Um, is that millions of people in this country and the world know that the president of the United States was the enemy of humanity. And with Biden as president, I think that knowledge is much less intense. One of the things that makes me feel pessimistic is the decline of the independent left in this country, and my guess is in other parts of the world. So my question to you, Khury, is do you agree with me that it's important to build the independent left? And how do we go about doing that?
Starting with the big questions, I think that oh my goodness, I think that not to overwhelm us here, but I think that a lot rides on us developing, you know, and kind of redeveloping in many ways, because we're not the first people to ever be faced with these questions, right? But yeah, we desperately need different left politics, and I think one of the challenges, you know, you made this point about, I mean, the Trump era. I mean, it was. Look, I know. Like I said, this country has been. I mean, I think that the United States is actually, as a project, is essentially violent. I think that the kind of essence of the core of the project, of the U.S. project, is violence. But those 4 years were brutal in ways that I think that, you know, we're still reckoning with, and probably will be for a while. And I think, but there's something what I think I resonate with what you said. There's something very honest about the Trump years. He was like, "Oh yeah, I'm keeping you out because you're brown, because you're black." I mean, that's what he was saying to immigrants. You know, he's like, "We're building a wall, so we don't want you, Muslims." Like they were direct and honest in a way that was a little different. And so I guess the question is, what are we doing what are we building to have these kind of honest reckonings with what the US is and what it's doing, that doesn't require a straight up fascist, you know, in the White House? I mean, I think that's on us. And it goes right to what you're saying about, you know, a different left politics. And I think with that, it requires something visionary, and it requires I mean, it can't just be responding to, you know, the horrors. It's got to be something visionary. And that's really why it's where the origins of this presentation came from. I said, "Oh my goodness, it's been 20 years. I can't believe it." I said, "Okay, but the next 20 years have yet to unfold." All right, so what are we going to do in those 20 years? I mean, I think we've got to reckon with the present, but it's got to be forward looking as well.
Yeah, I'm checking for any other hands up. Ken.
Hi.
Ken, go ahead. Ken Casanova. Go ahead, Ken.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. My question or observation, or both, is having to do with the relationship between the US and Afghanistan that you raised. And I think that a good portion of that means strengthening and democratizing the UN, so that we engage with democratically with the rest of the other countries of the world in terms of the reckoning that we are obliged to make to not only Afghanistan, but to the other countries around the world, to restore the original vision of the UN, but to correct it as well, so that all nations and peoples participate in the decision making. So that, you know, the UN has been sort of watered down and is not as, I don't want to use the word powerful, but I can't think of a better word. So that's just sort of my thought.
I have a bunch of thoughts on that, and yeah, I appreciate that. I see another hand up. Maybe we can get a few thoughts and questions on the table, and then I can come back if that's
Sure.
okay.
Someone joining us from Galaxy S9 phone, go ahead. Unmute self, please.
It's weird. It's my name should be on this. I don't know why I didn't show up. Gary, I've known you for how many weeks now? I've seen you at protests for years. And I want to welcome you to the community church. Interesting enough, we go back to protests over the years in organizations like ISO, Workers' World Party, PSL, Answer. And these groups, the biggest problem, I think, in doing work in the future is these groups are not willing to work together. They all call for their own protests and they don't work and join other people's protests. The ego of the left, you could say. My group or the highway. And I think that's the downfall of the left is we're not working together. We're working our group or no group. And I think what we can do to fight that ego and get these groups to work together if we want to go forward. Otherwise, we'll never gain and go anywhere. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we've got to figure out how to work together for sure. And you know, I mean, to say we've got to overcome the ego stuff, I mean, I think we've got to be like fundamentally grounded in like what our responsibilities are to each other, to the world, and also like again, I come back to the hopeful future that we're going to win. Like I think that we need to organize ourselves in a way that I really believe that in the hopeful Afghan future. I believe it. I believe that Palestine will be free. I know it, you know. And I think when we kind of ground ourselves in that actual promise, it just puts things in perspective. It doesn't mean that differences don't exist, you know, but it puts things in perspective. Yeah, and I have as much to learn and have learned, you know, learning as much as anybody else when it comes to that work of working together, but we've got to figure it out. And I will say, I think especially in the US, I know of some other places where people organize and they've figured some things out about how to not see eye to eye and everything, but kind of get it together. So I think we've got some particular things to learn here. I will say too, you know, as important as it is for those organizations and, you know, individuals who are currently organizing to figure out how to work with each other, I think it's really critical in this time too to know that there is newness, you know, unfolding right now. I mean, there's like this. I just think. I mean, I know it's been like a really like dark couple years in many ways, the pandemic and stuff. But like, I think about the conversation that's happening around like defunding the police and abolition right now. It's just unreal. I mean, you know, last year when the New York Times was running articles, you know, opinion pieces that say, okay, yeah, Mariam Kaba, what do you say about abolishing the police? Sure, let's hear it. You know, I was like, whoa, the New York Times, really? Like these are big conversations that are like finally reckoning with slavery. You know, this year 2021 was finally something of a reckoning with the Tulsa massacre in 1921. It took 100 years, you know, but it's a different conversation. And I think about the conversations around gender and sexuality. Like there's a lot going on right now. In so many ways, this is a very heavy, violent time. But in terms of progressive and radical ideas, there's actually also a kind of flowering unfolding, and that's going to produce new and different kinds of organizing too. So I just want to say that too, like yes, those of us who are currently organizing have got to figure out how to get together. And also a huge part of our work is actually making the space to invite and welcome and cultivate all the newness that's coming. I'll just say something briefly about what Ken said about the UN, because it's so like, you know, I mean, that point about transnational cooperation, you know, that I mentioned, I think is really, it's really real. And I have to say that during my kind of time, my politically formative time, which was around when the war on terror was starting, and the US was invading Iraq and things like that, what I saw, unfortunately, like the version of the UN that I saw in that moment was its failures, like its failures to stop these wars. And yet there are conversations happening in the UN actually this year about, for example, reviving the UN Office on Apartheid, which was constituted to deal with apartheid in Southern Africa and is now being discussed to deal with Israeli apartheid. There are all kinds of conversations around, you know, racism, systemic racism affecting the African and Black diaspora that not only exists in this country but around the world. The UN is a big, complex, interesting organization, and there are things happening there that I think need to be paid attention to, need to be contested, and need to be invested in. So I appreciate your thinking, Ken, and appreciate, you know, all the different transnational work that needs to be done in various institutions.
Beatrice, good morning. I mean, good afternoon. We'd love to hear from you, Beatrice, and we'd love to hear from you playing the piano sometime soon as well.
Okay.
Hi, go ahead.
Hi. I wanted to follow up on Khury's point about the transnational work that needs to be done. When we speak about reparations in Afghanistan, for instance, as we know, most of the troops from the United States are Black, brown, and poor people who wind up engaging in service. So if you could just kind of speak to that, it's, you know, I know work needs to be done, but the work of Afghanistan has primarily been those groups. So if you could just follow up a little more, I think it relates to what you just said in terms of transnational impact.
Yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts on that. I see another hand too from this main phone number, I believe.
Yes, sure. That would be Alan. Go ahead. Alan Clemens, our board member and chair of our building committee from far off in Maine. Hi, Alan.
Hi, I have to just step out the door to get some better reception. Thank you, Khury. A couple of comments. One about something that was raised, and my original comment that I wanted to make was about drones and the United States use of drones. I think we need to call it what it is terrorism, and, you know, conducted and executed by the United States of American government. I think all military aircraft are terrorism as well, but at a much more extreme level. You know, hovering over people's homes and workplaces and cars, and on beautiful, peaceful, sunny days, and suddenly the life of a family or a wedding party is over. And I mean, this is extreme terrorism. And one thing I think that we all need to do is write a formal letter to our two senators, and our congressional representative, and declare to them that this is terrorism, and request a response. But every one of us needs to go on record to deny our acceptance of this practice. We have that responsibility, and the same behavior, the same action by ourselves, it could be extended to many other things, but like at a minimum, this is something we all need to do to demonstrate just unequivocally that we are not party to this terrorism. And it's a small thing, but it's big. It's really big. The other comment I wanted to make was about talking about the left and so on. And, you know, I have a long history of activism and anti-war activity and leftist activity, and I proudly consider myself to be on the left. But I need to, you know, I'm in my 60s now, and I just want to point out that the system has changed in many ways. So there's a lot of people that are very moral and have great moral values and ethical values and so on that simply don't want to be considered on the left or to be considered in any party. Actually, they have values and they want to see a good world. But the system, in a sense, it's the system now that pigeonholes people into these political identities, and they know what they're doing. The power structure knows very well what they're doing, and the consequences can be, you know, fairly dramatic, say, for a young person on a career path who, you know, gets labeled as something. On the other hand, because of social media, you know, and we see this like in last year's response to George Floyd, that you know, people got active because they didn't want to see black people being murdered on the streets in public in broad daylight, and it's not limited to that at all. They don't, you know, many people are fully aware that it's the violence against black folks and minorities and other vulnerable people in our society is widespread, but it's that response to that breach of the legal and social contract that motivates people, not necessarily being part of a particular party. You know, people really want to keep their options open in many ways, I think, and now social media allows that. So I just want to, maybe there's a couple things for discussion there if we can continue on. And I want to thank you for listening to my comments.
Yeah, right on. I mean, well, just on the last point, I think that the the U.S. has constructed an extremely effective political system for being, you know, for this permanent war, and all of the other horrendous, you know, I don't know, violences that actually characterize life domestically. I mean, just on a really basic level, I guess naively thought that, I mean, the conversation, so in 2016, you know, there was a conversation around Medicare for all, you know, and finally revisiting this question of universal health care in the US. Didn't happen 2016, but I thought, wow, well, there's a pandemic, and I mean, if there was ever a time when we could have this conversation in a serious way, we're seeing just the utter failure of the non-healthcare system that we have in this country that has produced the largest death toll in the world, despite having the greatest accumulation of resources with which to deal with this pandemic in the world. Now would be the time for us to talk about universal healthcare. And this political system has successfully kept that conversation from happening. I mean, remarkably. So, you know, I really think that there does need to be, you know, an entirely different set of approaches to US politics, different parties, you know, and yeah, a recognition of just how undemocratic these institutions are. And once again, I'll say it's not just the United States that's asking these questions. There are people around the world who are grappling with these in many cases because the United States helped them cultivate their own undemocratic institutions. So we've got to unite with folks, you know, around the world and figure these things out. I've been so heartened by, I mean, talk about a new left. This is this kind of special moment in the history of socialism in the US right now. I mean, you know, I'm old enough to remember, you know, what, like 5 years ago when people said socialism's a dirty word, you know, that's not the conversation anymore in the US. It's a profound difference. And yet I'm struck by how domestic that conversation is. When the conversation around socialism, it tends to be socialism within the borders of the United States. And I think we gotta, you know, again, the problems that we face here the solutions will not just come from here. There needs to be some transnational conversation. You know, I want to just what Beatrice raised. I mean, the connections and the relationships between Black people, Black Americans, and brown folks in this country and U.S. empire. The connections are just many. They're like innumerable. And one thing is what you pointed to, which is the fact that the same people who are on the receiving end of some of the worst that this country has to offer, when I think about anti-Black racism and the dispossession of indigenous peoples, here, and then I think about military recruitment and who is overrepresented. Yeah, Black Americans, folks who are in colonized territories like Puerto Rico, Puerto Rican folks, Guamanian folks, are overrepresented in the U.S. military and in the people who die in these wars. So that's to say, I mean, it's actually, it's like, I mean, I'll say about Black Americans, in particular, like one of the functions of our oppression is our sort of enlistment in violence to oppress other people. And yet we are enlisted. We are not immune to the violence of the U.S. empire, not immune to participating in it. So we've got some reckonings to do there as communities, as part of the bigger reckoning that need to happen in this country. I will say too that the kind of like anti-Black racism, I think, in particular, and actually, the kind of ongoing war of colonization against indigenous peoples domestically, it is like the primer for those of us who live in this place to accept the violence enacted against people elsewhere. Like, for example, there are these, Iraq just had parliamentary elections, and the parliamentary system set up in Iraq it was cultivated by the United States, and it's along sectarian lines, so that there are Shia parties and Sunni parties and Kurdish parties in Iraq. And this is a recent, phenomenon in Iraqi history, but there's this notion that like Iraq is just always sort of hopelessly divided in this sort of racialized way. And I think that many Americans accept that as a matter of course, that there's something natural about that because the US is so racially divided. And that is sort of naturalized as like, oh yeah, there are just some neighborhoods that you don't go to, and people, all the kind of racist garbage that you learn by living in this country, it prepares people to accept the racism and the violence that the US enacts abroad. So there's just countless connections. But the good thing is the fight, like Black Lives Matter and the fights for Black freedom here have only been beneficial actually for conversations about US empire, and that have required more critique of US empire. So I think those of us who see these connections need to really work to highlight them. And yeah, the conversation on reparations for Black people here we should talk about reparations for Afghan people and what are the similarities and differences, and there are connections to be made.
I want to invite folks to come here. Kathy Kelly, November 7th, either come or just turn your computer on the subject of drones and weaponized drones and Afghanistan. There's somebody who's been on the ground numerous times, Afghanistan, serious connections with people there. I'm really anxious to hear Kathy. That's November 7th. Other programs coming up, of course, Winona LaDuke next Sunday. Stop the Pipeline, Enbridge 3 line activists speak out. Several area activists and folks from other places tuning in to tell us their experiences, as well as Winona. We have October 31st is Halloween and Dia de los Muertos. And that day, we're gonna just talk amongst ourselves about books that we read that made an impression on us this summer. Judith Woodruff will be the facilitator. I will be in El Salvador, so I won't be joining you unless I can figure out how to call in from a cell phone on top of a remote mountain village. November 14th, Joseph Irizarry is a fellow who spent a bunch of time in prison and is out on parole, and he heads up the campaign to end life without parole, November 14th. And again, I want to remind folks about Lee Underwood's parole hearing this Thursday. If you're able to come, I'd be glad to give you a ride, pick you up and take you home afterwards. Maybe even buy you lunch, pupusas. Lots of other great stuff coming up. Some music. Native American songwriter Diana Jones, Margaret Randall, longtime women's activist and poet, lived Cuba many years and Nicaragua many years. We haven't heard from her in about 30 years, so this will be a wonderful reunion with Margaret Randall. Danny Searson, that's a new voice for us, incredible ex-military major, and his title is called Beyond Afghanistan, Patriotic Dissent Against U.S. Militarism, and that's on December 5th. Lots of wonderful programs at Community Church. You can find those online, our Facebook page or our website. Or if you want something on paper, let us know and we'll send this to you. We'll fold it up, we'll put a stamp and your address on it. So if there are no other questions, again, I want to thank Khury for being with us. It's always a pleasure and a joy, and I hope we'll see you again soon. Dan the Bagel Man, can you talk more about Mr. Underwood? Well, Lee Underwood has spent most of his life in prison and has been out on parole a couple of times, and his case is a living example that parole, the way it's constituted right now, is untenable. They have you on such a ridiculously short leash that any type of little tiny picayune infraction gets you back in prison for a bunch of years. Lee is, I wrote a piece to the parole board on his behalf, and my impression of Lee is that he's a really sweet, gentle soul and deserves, let's call it, another second chance. And that's why I'm going to be out there with several other people from our congregation and with his employer, who's building contractor Paul Donnellan. Anybody else want to make an announcement or make an observation before we conclude? And I, hungry that I am, not having breakfast or lunch, go to enjoy pupusas from our stellar cook, Luis Alonso Guzman. Let's see. Here's a word that says, Khury, check out This Week in Palestine, 8 a.m. today. Well, that's passed already, but maybe it's on archive. John Roberts, of course, who is our friend, and Mary Lynn says it's archived. And again, thank you. Beatrice says Khury in the chat, and so lots of thank yous, and let's carry on doing good work and good trouble and good progress and good activism. And shall we say thank you to Jim Casteris. Jim is coming off our board of directors, and on comes Jose Aleman, who I don't think is with us today, but Jose used to be the Consul General of El Salvador for New England region, and he's now a Spanish professor in Westford, Mass, out on Route 495. And Dick Crowley, so good to see you. I hope you keep on joining us every Sunday. And Dan the Bagel Man, loads of other folks. Thank you for being with us. Barry Warner, who's going to El Salvador with me. That's a beautiful thing. We have a little delegation of folks going on this trip to visit 4 villages. Anyone is welcome to go on those trips in future times. The train leaves the station in normal times every 6 months. I haven't been in 2 years though because of COVID. So that's another nice thing to tell you about. Everybody, let's say goodbye and let's end.
Thank you, Khury. Thank you so much.
Amen. Hallelujah. Amen. Hallelujah. Amen. 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 Woo! Amen. Woo! Amen. 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 Joy, happiness. Amen. Hallelujah. Amen. 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 And thank you, Fulani Haynes. And thank you, Michael Shea. And thank you, Khury Petersen. And thank you, everybody. And come and see us at Community Church whenever you like, because we're open and welcoming. Hallelujah. In South Africa, Lady Smith Mambazo always ends it with bye-bye. Did I get your street address, Khury? That's outer space. Yeah, it's somebody's calling in from outer space.
We don't want to go because we won't see Khury's face for a long time. So we're going to sit here and look at his face.
He's a beautiful man.
Thank you. I wore my special floral scarf for you all.
I noticed. It's wonderful. I was looking for the beads, but then I thought, oh no, it's got this great scarf.
The flowers are like growth and, you know, newness and blooming.
Great. Wonderful. You look beautiful.
This is really, really special. Really special.
Yeah, we'll see you again, Khury, at the next protest. I'm sure the big one. Unless you don't live here anymore. You live in Boston still, right?
What's up?
You're still in the Boston area?
I am. I'm in Dorchester.
Dorchester, okay. I'm making sandwiches for Copley Square and Park Street right now.
Oh, nice.
Well, I feed every day, except I took yesterday off. We have a lot of hungry people in Boston thanks to our great government in the city, which is not doing the job, and the state. So it goes on all levels, not just federal. City and state are failing. They work for the rich also. That's the problem.
So I don't have to call you Jim Casteris. Will you give me a call when you get a chance? I got a lot of building news to share with you. And to everybody who's still left here, this Bob Datilio library that we're getting, all of his books, it's just remarkable. And come by and see what we've got. A lot of it is going to the Boston Public Library. There's some other places that it's going, tons of Sacco and Vanzetti stuff, tons of stuff on anarchism and Italian immigrant experience. It's all collecting in boxes. We're putting it out to look at it up on the third floor, which is vacant now. Okay.
Gene.
Yes.
At 83, I'm seriously thinking about where I'm going to leave my stuff. So I've got 3 volumes of Das Kapital plus 3 volumes of Surplus Value plus the Grundrisse. So I'll have a box of books to bring down there.
The sheer volume of what Bob Datilio left, and it's both the treasure of it and the dumpsterness of it. You know, it's halfway in between.
Yeah.
I can't bear the thought, but if you know,
we need a library in the library.
That's a valid and sacred purpose for Community Church to be a repository of lots and lots of books. Maybe even become a used bookstore or a library of the left.
There you go.
It's something to
pretty
think about a
bad.
lot.
We used to have that in Cambridge. We used to have 2 of them, and they're gone.
Yeah.
You know, that's since the 70s. So yes, and you need a good librarian
Yes, yes.
that will be paid well.
We need many librarians for our archives as well. Just
Yeah, a lot of
amazing, amazing set of history there. All right.